The Darkmoor expansion has finally released, and with it, the start of Arc 5 has begun. Today, I'm going to be doing a narrative analysis of Darkmoor, Miranda Briar, and just try to talk about what this all could mean, try to analyze it from a narrative lens, and see where we are, because we've been introduced to a lot of interesting ideas. Spoilers are obviously ahead, so if you have not beat Darkmoor, go ahead and go do that, and come on back. It's no secret that Wizard 101 has already lived a incredibly long life. With that, there's bound to be some changes as the story progresses, but before I get into Arc 5 and what I think makes Darkmoor so special, I want to talk about Arc 4. I'll be quick because I've already made a several hour long sort of retrospective about Arc 4, but essentially the last time that we saw the young wizard and their friends, we were cartoonish, to say the least. The game has obviously always been very cartoonish, considering the third world was talking British furry dogs. However, I would argue that Arc 4 decided that it would be in the game's best interest to no longer take its story seriously. Whether that be in acknowledgement of an aging player base or something else, I don't know. But Arc 4 marked a serious tonal shift towards satire and comedy rather than sincere storytelling like the arcs that had come before it. Still, there was hints of sincerity in design and that whole story arc, but ultimately I feel like it did fall flat when it came to addressing and creating a serious narrative for its players. Usually the game does a pretty good job of balancing its cartoonish, unserious nature with more serious or sincere storytelling, but Arc 4 missed the mark for me by a lot. I do want to introduce a concept that I will be using for the rest of this video, which is the concept of Wizard 101 worlds as characters themselves. Each world has its own distinct atmosphere, vibe, almost its own genre in and of itself, and so I think when we're talking about the nature of Wizard 101's story and how it formats its story, this can help us conceptualize the episodic parts of the game a lot better. There's not a whole lot I can say, so just keep in mind that each world is its own character in an abstract sense. That being said, I think we can just move past this part and talk about, well, villains have never been subtle in these games. Malister is clearly Malice Stare, Morgantz is clearly a play on Morgan Le Fay, even Grandfather Spider is named after what he is, a spider. So then we meet someone named Miranda Briar, and I think my first instinct really just was how normal her name was. Everyone always just calls her Miranda Briar. I think there's only a couple times where someone calls her Miranda or Briar. And so for a while, I thought that Miranda Briar might be a compound name, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So, okay, what does the name mean? Because they're not subtle. They're either funny or the name just gives you the thesis of the character. So, the name Miranda, hilariously, comes from Latin, and it means worthy of admiration, which I guess makes sense for who she is as a person. Briar is also fairly interesting. A briar is a thorny rosebush, essentially. So, dangerous, wild, untamed, uncontrolled, painful, and strikingly, one of the most common flowers you see in Darkmoor, to the point that I would argue it is intentionally being associated with the world, are thorned rose bushes. So, okay, worthy of admiration and roses. That seems like a pretty good character thesis. Let's look at her design. I think this is one of the best character designs we've had in a while, but I do want to break it down because I think there's several pieces of symbolism, visuals that we could analyze here. One of the most striking things to me would be her hair. It is put up very tightly. There is a braid right along the top of her head. It looks incredibly constrained, and it's a hard hairstyle to do. As well, it's two-toned, so that's already incredibly striking. I do think it's probably not an accident that it is two-toned with a lighter color and then almost, not jet black, but pretty dark. That's raven black. Something that I do find interesting is it does seem, while her design is obviously incredibly fantastical and what we've come to expect from this world, her design also seems to still have a lot of Earth influence. If you look at her long-sleeved shirt and her pants, those are fairly mundane clothes. She's put on this very fantastical jacket and vest and these boots and all of this jewelry, but underneath all of that is a fairly typical outfit. Now, as for design inspiration, there seems to be two elements that I'm noticing. The first being, she kind of looks like a wrestler. The exaggerated jacket, the flare, it's a little bit wrestler-coded. As well, I think she actually is meant to evoke the image of a harpy, which is interesting, to say the least. Harpies in folklore and culture are snatchers. They are agents of punishment. They represent storm winds and change. And as you can see here, it is said that when someone disappears from the earth, they were carried off by the harpies. I think you can really see it in her boots, but you can see it as well in her jacket. The raven feathers, well, I do think are incredibly loaded of a choice, considering that one of the gods of this world is in fact a raven. It does evoke the image that she herself has wings in a way. At least it leaves the suggestion open. I could go into more detail on this design because I think her design and her character definitely leave a lot of themes in place that could potentially be talked about and discussed as a lens to read her character through, but I will stop there because I think the harpy theming is the most important, and I'll come back to the wrestler theming a little bit because I do think that is a lens to look at her behavior through. Arc 5 starts with the Arcanum Scholars in the Ghost of Duncan Grimwater's Dignity, promoting you to the Scholar of Applied Magics, which is a real position that they didn't just make up. It doesn't last though, and something immediately goes wrong, because of course it does. Alarms blare, there's a hole in the ship, you go to investigate, you find some weird shadow creatures, you head back out to the main hall of the lower part of the ship, and that's when you meet her. Sort of. She's astral projecting, but for the most part, congratulations, we've met her. Remember earlier how I said there was wrestler inspiration in her design? Well, she is playing that up. She is being theatrical, she is giddy, she is excited to be here in a way that I don't think we've ever really seen in a villain before. She is quite literally playing the bad guy. And the whole sequence reflects this, too. Obviously, everyone's taking it incredibly seriously, but it's funny in a way that's a lot more subdued than Arc 4, but it's still incredibly funny. This is partially a performance, and you can almost tell, because near the end of the sequence, she even calls out to you, and she says, "Your move." Now, despite the Arcanum's best efforts, they do send someone, Duncan, to guard the elevator to the main area, but unfortunately, Miranda gets past him through no fault of his own, I'm sure, and she makes her way into Sybil's chamber.
Hi, sorry, second round of editing on my computer, small correction. They don't send Duncan to guard the elevator. That wouldn't make any sense. They send him to guard the bridge. He guards the bridge from Miranda. And he fights Miranda on the bridge, and then he drags himself back to the repository. It wouldn't make any sense if he was guarding the elevator, because as far as I think the game tells us, Miranda was on another floor with a different elevator that she could use. It wouldn't make any sense for him to guard the elevator of the repository. That's my bad. That doesn't really affect the analysis or anything, but it doesn't make any tactical sense for him to guard the elevator. He was in the bridge. Sorry.
And this is where Miranda Breyer kills Sybil, and by doing so, she kills the narrative. So what do I mean by killing the narrative? Because that's an incredibly weird and possibly high concept thing for me to say. Well, essentially, Killing the narrative in this case would be her asserting control of the tone and the type of story that we are in. Once Miranda kills Sybil, that is it. There are almost no jokes for quite a while, and even when the game does start trying to joke and have a laugh again, it is much more subdued than what we saw in Arc 4. Thus, she kills the narrative. She kills the preconceptions that we have about how the story is going to go. She kills the idea that this was going to be anything like Arc 4, and she forces all of us to abide by the tone that she wants to set. Sybil's death hangs over the entire world like a shadow. It affects everything from here on out, and I do think it is incredibly pointed in a way that Sybil was such a major driving force in Arc 4 and Arc 3, and now she is gone. The wizard goes to Darkmoor specifically for revenge. A fact that the game will not let you forget, and one that Miranda even subtly points out. She is constantly questioning your motivations as to why you're actually here, and why you didn't show up to help Darkmoor sooner, which leads us into the next part of this essay. Darkmoor is interesting as a world for Arc 5. One, the first thing that you're essentially told about the world is that it used to be almost entirely human. That is, used to be. Darkmoor was cursed long ago by an ancient academy of horrible evil called the Scholomance. The Scholomance twisted the inhabitants of the world, at least most of them, into immortal beings. That being vampires, gargoyles, werewolves, and creatures known as the Scolomari, which are pretty decent allegories for the Fae, as far as I can tell. This has forced the remaining humans of the world to essentially live as outsiders, living in traveling caravans and trying to avoid the monsters that want to eat them. Nobody wants to be eaten. This does lead to the mild problem of, once you arrive in Darkmoor, the outsiders that you meet aren't super trusting of you. You are the scion of Bartleby. You are his right hand. You are his avatar. You are his child if you have certain headcanons. And in the outsider's opinion, Bartleby has abandoned them. Why should they trust you? Why should they believe that now you've come to save them after years of them being forced to live in the dark? And they're not the only ones who share this opinion. The Broken Branch look initially very much like the Schism. You meet them during the prequest, however, it becomes clear that they are not the Schism whatsoever. The Broken Branch are a group of humans who have taken it upon themselves to try and liberate Darkmoor from the curse of the Scholomance. They ultimately just want the curse to be cured. That is their main motivation, but you don't realize this until about halfway through the world. Initially, you're led to believe that Miranda is the one leading them and that they completely defer to her. This is not the whole truth. We'll get to that, but first we need to talk about curing the curse. Every monster in Darkmoor was once a human being, and as you travel through the city of Graveholm, the Broken Branch are hard at work to turn everyone back. You catch their trail as they invade the bedroom and try to turn a woman by the name of Lucy Easton, who was turned by her sire around 200 years ago, if I remember correctly. They succeed, and this leads you to the mortal plane as you chase after her. But first, I want to point out that I don't think it is a coincidence that Darkmoor is a mostly human world. Outside of the Arcanum stuff, and I suppose you could probably count the monsters, there are no anthropomorphic furries in Darkmoor. I wouldn't count the monsters because they're initially human, and I think that's by design. The main theme is obviously to instill doubt in the young wizard about Bartleby and his motivations and his competence, but I do think there is something incredibly interesting about Miranda's arc and the fact that Darkmoor is a mostly human world. It is evoking the image of Earth in a way, because we don't have talking furries on Earth, but we do have humans. And Darkmoor is the first time, possibly since Wizard City, that the wizard has been surrounded by humans. You find Lucy in the mortal plane, where she has changed her tune. Initially, she was taken by the broken branch away from Graveholm, but now she seems to be grateful to them. She says that they cared for her, that they fed her, and now she's here in the mortal plane, where she is trying to convince a village of human beings that their overlords, the vampires, are in fact trying to eat them. They don't believe her, but we try to help her out anyway, and this is when we meet Miranda Breyer again. A villager who has been keeping quiet but is otherwise suspicious of the vampires as well directs us to a hospital. When we get there, we find a group of vampire nurses trying to eat a guy who sprained his arm, because that's an appropriate reaction. We give chase, we hear shouting, and then...
Stand back! She's mine! Hello, you.
And from here on, absolutely nothing makes sense. Okay. So, you find Miranda again, and her and Lucy seem to be on good terms, great terms even, to the point where I almost legitimately thought that they were going to set up some kind of romance. Everything that happens in the mortal plane is incredibly strange, and honestly, it would be a fool's errand for me to try to figure out what it all means. You and Miranda talk, and this is the point where I would say almost the manipulation of the young wizard begins. Miranda tells you that she wants to save Darkmoor, that she wants to liberate the mortal plane and stop all of these people from getting eaten by vampires. Something she specifically says is, "True, screaming them in the face and they still won't believe it. People really are the same all over," which I think is a major part of her character and her motivation. It's hard to tell what's entirely an act and what is genuine. I would argue that her saving the mortal plane isn't just her trying to keep up appearances or get on your good side. I think she genuinely wanted to save the mortal plane. I wouldn't say it was a huge priority for her, but it seems like far too much effort to just try to look good in your eyes. The majority of the mortal plane sequence actually has Miranda accompany you. In a sense, she plays the video game with you. She teaches you a new mechanic. She accompanies you into a dungeon. She confronts a big bad with you. She, for all intents and purposes, becomes your sidekick for a little while. And she's not entirely cruel to you either, is the strange thing. She laughs when you insult an enemy. She says that she didn't know you had that kind of fire. She seems almost delighted to have someone to talk to, and one of the more interesting things is she tells you that she wants you to come with her. She wants you to help her. She says, "I want to plant the seed of a freer universe, and maybe you can help." She wants you to let go of Sybil, saying that she was just a tree and that she can use what she took from Sybil to free both of you. And her behavior with Lucy seems relatively cordial. She seems concerned about Lucy. She seems, for all intents and purposes, to be a pretty decent rebel leader. Your friends warn you about her and tell you pretty much straight up that she can't be doing this out of the kindness of her heart and to keep your wits about you. And for the most part, I do think the young wizard is intended to have listened to this advice, but they are still ultimately blindsided when Lucy succumbs to the years that she spent as a vampire. Miranda says that she knew, that she hypothesized that this would happen, and that the experiment is now complete. She says this as Lucy dies. And then she turns to the young wizard, and she says that she will see them around. I want to wrap this video up by just talking about the wizard's relationship to Miranda, because there is something very interesting about a character dynamic where one of the characters is a faceless, silent protagonist. So, what is the wizard's relationship to Miranda? Obviously, they're setting them up, like they set most villains up, to be a foil to the young wizard. But what does that mean in this context? I think, personally, it's a little bit too early to tell. Most of Miranda's behavior on screen is hard to get a read on, and it's very hard to tell with her where the line of sincerity versus manipulation ends. What I will say, though, is I do think a lot of her interactions with the wizard are incredibly telling. First off, what she calls them. Most of the time we are called young wizard or scholar or initiate or something, right? Miranda, however, calls us whiz kid, which is a playground insult. To me, that comes off as very... She's calling us a teacher's pet, more or less. You call someone a whiz kid when they are top of their class, when they are beloved, maybe a little bit of a suck up. It is a playground insult. It is both demeaning and strangely friendly. She doesn't say it in a derogatory manner. It's just what she calls you. Even in her own personal notes, she says she can't blame the whiz kid for leaving. If it was meant to insult the player character, she would use can't blame the kid for leaving, or something along those lines. She would drop the name, but she doesn't. I think she is intending to manipulate the wizard. I think that's very obvious, but I don't think she dislikes the wizard. There are many times where she talks down to you, or she talks bad about your friends, but at the same time, she makes an attempt to joke around with you. She dances around the subject, but she does try to explain her plan to you, and she even says that you have power, that you have skill that could be used to save and help Earth. There are several times that she offers for the wizard to join her. Even at the end of Darkmoor, when you fight her in the Scholomance, she seems genuinely disappointed that she has ruined her chance at getting you to trust her. And then she says that that's okay because you still have time. Not even you. We. It's incredibly interesting. Do I think that Miranda genuinely likes the young wizard? I think she does. I think ultimately she does like the young wizard. For what reasons, I'm not entirely sure on, but I think she genuinely does want the wizard to see her perspective and to join her. But I'm not sure that she's being entirely honest with us. I think she is withholding information. I think she is not being truthful with us, and I think ultimately she does want us for a more utilitarian purpose than just companionship. As for the young wizard's part, I don't think Miranda is talking to as much of a brick wall as their silent stare would lead everyone to believe. Their arc in the Black Lagoon, which they have finally had something of an arc, has them not reject Bartleby, but they express frustration with their role. They feel like a weapon. They feel like they can't make their own decisions, and at the end of the Black Lagoon, they resolve to make their own decisions. The wizard makes choices in the Black Lagoon. They express frustration. Whether or not Miranda awoke these feelings, probably not, but it does show that she might be getting into their head, or at least she has a chance of doing so. The question then becomes, is the wizard gonna turn heel? Are they going to betray the spiral and choose Earth? I can't say for certain. I'm not the writers, one, and on another hand, even making an estimate, I'm not so sure. Because it seems like the wizard going bad, truly, and making the decision to do something that is against the spiral, or at least ill-advised. It doesn't seem like something that King's Isle would write. The wizard has never been wrong. They've been manipulated, sure, but never in a way that was grave or egregious. So the question then becomes, can Miranda push them over the edge? How do you fracture a tomorrow in an MMO where the path is always clear? How do you convince a silent protagonist to believe you when you say that you have a plan? How do you convince someone who left Earth to choose it?